Hey, this is Jason with 4W Knives. Today's project is going to be making a kitchen knife out of some Damascus. I've already made up the billet, use this on another knife. I do not know what the layer count is on this. My assumption is around that 45 layers. That's usually the basic one that I do. I usually label it differently if I don't. But I've had this sitting around. It is looks like 0.03 or 0.32. It comes out to just over 3.5 inches, and it is about 1.5 inches wide. I'm hoping to get it out to about 10 inches and make something similar to this. So we'll see. This billet was pretty small. Didn't have a whole lot to work with. I wanted to get a little bit more width to it, so I used the rounding dies and turned the billet at somewhat of an angle to get it to widen as well as lengthen out. I did 2 heats this way, and then I flattened it out with the aggressive flattening dies. Once I get it pressed out, I use the roller mill and lengthen it the rest of the way. Thin it down pretty thin, at least compared to what I'm used to working with, as I'll talk about here in a little bit. A lot of scale develops on these billets the longer you work them in the forge. They're hard on the abrasive belts, so a lot of times I'll just use my angle grinder to knock all that scale off and get down to the steel. All right, so here it is after forging. Super duper thin. Let's see here. This is showing to be 0.09. Thinnest that I've made up to this point. By the time that I do my surface grinding, it is going to be way thin, which in a kitchen knife it should be. I've decided that it's too thin to forge, so I'm going to go ahead and do stock removal, get it all cleaned up, and see what we can come up with. So there it is. With the material being so thin, the portaband made short work of it. Usually the Damascus can get work hardened and it's really tough on these blades, but this cut through it really easily, and I just didn't feel like using the cutoff wheel on the angle grinder. All right, so once I get it to its final shape on the 2x72, I'll do a little bit of surface grinding. This is thin, so I used an 80 grit belt to do my surface grinding instead of the normal 36. I thought with the 36 it would put too deep of scratch marks and it would be too hard to get rid of without thinning the material too much. After surface grinding, I had to go ahead and do my heat treating. The material was already down to 0.07, and I didn't want to take a chance of it warping, so I put up a straightening jig, heat treated, put it in the jig, and then I did my tempering. Luckily it came out of the temper straight and with a good golden color, so the heat treat went well. So I go ahead and do a little bit of surface grinding just to clean it up, being very careful throughout the rest of this process not to overheat the blade, so I dip it in water quite often. Being so thin, I was afraid it would heat up pretty fast. So using a black Sharpie, I get my center line marked by darkening the edge and then using the tool I got from Jantz to scratch in the center line from both sides. I use this as my guide so that the bevels stay symmetrical or the edge stays centered, however you want to look at it. As far as the grinding of the bevels go, this took a little while. The blade is super thin, but one, it's already been heat treated, so the steel is hard. Two, I started with an 80 grit belt to avoid getting those deep scratches that I mentioned earlier. And three, I was worried about overheating it, so I dunked it quite often. So this process, even though it was thin, it did take a long time. I feel like it turned out pretty good. I used the flat platen, a little bit of the wheel at the bottom, and then I try out my new rotator platen or rotating platen just to try to get a little bit of a convex edge, which will be showing up here in just a minute. So when I switch to the rotating platen, I also go to a 120 grit belt. I do this rotating platen. It's kind of like a slack belt with a rubber backing or rubber belt for backing. The blade gives a little bit, so it's able to work on the edge a little bit more so than the flat platen. And I slowly work that bevel up a good ½ inch to 2 inches up, and then slowly thin it towards the top. It worked pretty good. I'm still learning how to use this rotator platen. I'm not quite figured it all out, but I think this is probably one of the best grinds that I've put on a chef knife or kitchen knife, whatever you want to call it. It just came out more symmetrical and sharper than the other ones that I've made. All right, the package is a little bit hard to see, but that's water buffalo horn that I purchased from Jantz. Just like the color scheme on it, a little bit of white. Looks kind of like wood, but it's a little more water resistant and got a little bit more pop to it. So that's what I went with. I think it turns out pretty good, so I like my choice. Right here, I'm just using the drill press and the blue tape is how I do it. I keep saying it, I keep trying some different methods, but I keep coming back to this one. It just seems like I don't have as much room to mess up when I do it this way. Just after you drill one hole, you got to make sure you put the pin in to keep it straight, and then you drill the other one, and it's pretty cut and dry. All right, so after I get the pinholes drilled, I'll use the pins and keep the scales to the tang. I'll do a rough grind, getting it pretty close to the edge. After I do this, I will take the scales off, pin them together, and I will do the part that transitions to the blade right there. I want it to match on both sides, so I'll draw a line, grind them both at the same time. I'll also grind in the angle that I need on this side of the scales, and then I'll take and do a little bit of hand sanding just to get it down to a finished mark, because after you glue it up, it is extremely difficult to get this part cleaned up. I just do a 320 sandpaper right there, and then I take it to the buffer to clean it up a little bit prior to the glue up. This is post glue up. I've already cut off the pins, and now I am just using the flat platen to grind the sides of the scales flat. I'll go sideways, and then I'll run it the length of the flat platen to get the grain structure going the same way. All right, so a little bit of finish work on the grinder using the 1-inch wide belts. This does good for contouring it the way that I want, and then I take it in and do some hand sanding, and bring it back out and do a little bit of buffing. After that, I get it sharp on the work sharp, and being this thin material, this do come out sharp. Probably one of the sharpest ones I've had come out of my shop. And here's the finished product. I kind of like these scales. I've used buffalo horn before, but I haven't used it on a chef knife or kitchen knife. I'm thinking this is going to be a good trend for me. I like doing the thinner material. Like I said, it came out super sharp. It's lightweight. Probably going to do all my kitchen knives this type of thickness from here on out. I sanded down the Damascus more so than what I normally do. I did a heavy buffing. I kind of like the way it came out. It doesn't have the dark contrast that a lot of the ones that I've done do have, but I still like the way it came out, a little more natural look. And at this point, I just want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the product that I produced. And if you would, like and subscribe. I appreciate it.